Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Frame.io Live. I'm your host, Shawn McDaniel, and we've got an exciting and fun show for you today. Now, we're getting started, right on time today. So I want to let a few folks kind of pop into the room. The number is slowly increasing. That means people are kind of getting settled in. But we got a great show for you today. To kind of kick things off, though, I love to kind of find out. Hi, David. How are you? I'd like to find out where everyone's coming from. So we're broadcasting live from Los Angeles, California, right in the heart of Hollywood. But tell us where you're all coming from, because sometimes we get some really interesting and like really far away places of folks that come into our audience. So love to get kind of a gauge where everyone's coming in at. Also, just kind of brings everyone together into one space. So we've got a few popping in. We've got once again, hello, David. We've got Samuel. We got Film and Photo School from Washington, D.C. We got Orlando, Florida. Howdy from San Francisco, Dayton, Ohio, New England, Austin, Texas, Lithuania. Hello, Montreal, Canada. Another Canada, Munich. I was just in Munich last year. Beautiful, beautiful city. And I went to Oktoberfest, which was incredibly fun. What an amazing group of people. And just what an amazing festival. So yes, Munich, you got a soft spot for me. Dallas, we got Barcelona, we got New York, we got Detroit, we've got Ukraine, we've got Boston, NYC based editor here. Love it. Love New York. This is great. Keep them all coming. There's so many folks in here. This is amazing. We've got another New York, we got Panama, we got Colorado, we've got Mexico. This is amazing. Well, I'm so glad you guys are all here. We've got so much to go over and cover today. But now that you've located that Q&A box to start throwing in the chat, think about some questions. If you're aspiring editors, or if you're even like a pro editor and you just like, you know what, I want to learn this workflow. I want to understand how to, break down a story and how to tell it better as an editor. This is a really great place to get those questions, because Daniel and Emily have a wealth of knowledge. And we're going to go over all of that momentarily, but they have a wealth of knowledge that they want to share with you about their experiences. And this is a great opportunity for you to throw in your questions. And we have some folks on the sidelines answering those questions, if there's any ones that we can kind of answer for you quickly. But we've got a little area where we're going to queue up a bunch, and we're super excited to get those questions in. But yeah, all over the world. Look at that. Yeah, David saying all over the world. There's a lot of folks in here. I'm pretty excited, and everyone's super engaged. I'm really digging on this. Down the street, East Hollywood. Yeah, you're not too far from us at all. We got some London. Yeah, we'll keep those comments coming in, but I don't want to take up any more time. I'd like to actually kind of get started. Again, throw those questions in. We've got some Q&A time at the end. And also, if you've got any ideas for topics that you want to learn more about, whether it's color, whether it's editing, whether it's production, or if you want to learn more about Frame.io and Adobe as a whole, throw in those comments what you're looking for. We like to scan them and just kind of get a quick idea of what everyone's looking for. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, I was saying earlier, when it comes to any video project, the editor's job is to put that story together using the script as a blueprint to tell a cohesive story. Now, this happens after gathering all the footage that's collected over a few weeks of shooting, or even a few years, depending on the production itself. But this cannot be accomplished alone without the help of their assistant editor and post-production supervisor to make sure that it all comes together. And today, we're going to understand more about that relationship between these two roles and how this team was able to execute massive results for an independent project. So editor Daniel Garber's varied career has led him from cutting documentaries and narrative films to a new series for FX. He was recently up for an Independent Spirit nomination for How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is currently streaming on Hulu, so definitely check it out. It's a great film. And alongside him, he frequently works with his assistant editor and post-production supervisor, Emily Yue. They also know what it's like to work on an indie budget and deliver big results. And their tools of choice, well, Adobe Premiere Pro and Frame.io. And today we're going to discuss with Emily and Daniel how they save time, how they stay focused, and how they have clear collaboration with each other and other creative contributors, letting them really concentrate on the creative. Now, to give you a little bit more context on the film, we're going to focus a lot of our discussion around How to Blow Up a Pipeline, but to give you as an audience a little bit more context I'm going to go ahead and show you the trailer for How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Let's take a look.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Boom Talk. Today, teaching myself to make a homemade blasting cap. And if this works, it'll be step one in making our own improvised explosive.
Might be headed to Texas for the winter.
What's in Texas?
It's a project.
What kind of project?
Try to stop a pipeline from being built on my property. Poisons the air, water.
Damn, this place is sick. You guys cooking meth in here?
You ready to start working?
We have to show how vulnerable the oil industry is by hitting something big.
Michael, what do you think the odds are we blow ourselves up?
I don't really care.
We could blow the pipe at the hilltop, keep the oil from leaking.
You're not actually thinking.
I'm not thinking about it. I'm doing it.
What if y'all do structural damage?
Structural damage is kind of the point.
This is destruction of federal property. Terrorism.
American Empire calls us terrorists, then we're doing something right.
If you're seeing this, let those who profit from mass death know their properties will be trashed.
3, 2, 1.
They will defame us and claim this was violence or vandalism, but this was justified. This was an act of self-defense.
Compelling stuff. And I just watched this film the other day, and I got to tell you, the tension is for real. It's this constant build and just a really great look at each one of those characters in the film. So I'm really excited to talk to editor Daniel and also post-production supervisor Emily. So let's go ahead and take a look at who our guests are. Bring them up on the screen. Boom, we're talking with Daniel Garber, who is the editor of How to Blow Up a Pipeline. We'll also break down some of his other projects as well. We also have Emily Yue, who's the assistant editor and post-production supervisor on this production, and others. They've worked on a few things together quite a few times. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank them for joining us as well. Again, drop in those questions. We hope to have a nice queue up at the end so we can have our Q&A discussion later in the event. But for now, let's start our discussion. So welcome, Daniel and Emily. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us. This is such a treat.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you guys are both here. And I know you guys have so much stuff that you're working on. So it's a real honor for you guys to hop on the show with us. But I do want to start and give a little context to our audience about what you do and, how you have kind of got to this point in your career so far. So tell us a little bit about yourselves and your career.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've been working as an editor for about 10 years now. I started in the world of documentaries. So after I graduated from college, I started working for one of my former teachers on this long-running archival documentary called The Reagan Show. And it took 3 years to make, but that was kind of how I cut my teeth and learned essentially all of the skills of being an editor just in that trial by fire. So I started with that and then went on to making a fiction film with the director of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, Daniel Garber. It was his first feature called Cam, which is kind of a horror thriller film on Netflix. And then from that point, I was able to kind of bounce back and forth between the worlds of fiction and nonfiction, which is kind of an odd way to exist in this industry, where I think people generally want you to kind of sort yourself into one category and say, I'm just about this one thing. But I found it really enjoyable to kind of bounce back and forth. And yeah, I think that's one thing that works well about my collaboration with Emily too, who also has some wider ranging interests.
Yeah, Emily, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah. After graduating college, I moved to New York and was working as a production assistant. And then I became a post-production assistant and then kept following the post-production route. And then Yeah, I met Dan, and I guess the rest is history. I've assisted with Dan, I think, like on 2 films, 2 features so far, 1 fiction and 1 documentary, and it's been cool to like see both sides of narrative and doc when I think, yeah, it is hard to kind of switch between sometimes. So
Absolutely. So let's dig a little bit into editing theory, and I just want to kind of kick it off since you both have a very strong background in narrative projects and documentary. How do you approach these two different types of genres? Is there a different mindset you have to go to for each to kind of get it off and running?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because in a way, I feel like there are a lot of people who really want to believe that there is no distinction between the two. And in a sense, that's true. I mean, editing is always so fundamental to filmmaking, whatever the genre is. And you kind of just have to employ whatever editing tools are most suited to that particular kind of project. But I would say that broadly speaking, I mean, documentaries just have a lot more footage, and the role of the editor is different because you're very often the writer as well. There usually isn't a script or a story producer telling you, this is the order in which things should go. And so I feel like both my parents are doctors, and so I often think of this in terms of like a medical analogy, but I think of documentaries more like orthopedic surgery. You have much blunter tools, and then fiction filmmaking is often like a neurosurgery. You have such fine-tuned control, and a subtle change in somebody's performance can result in like a very different perception of the emotional qualities of the film. And so I think the two are overlapping skill sets, but not completely the same. And I think it's fun to be able to work within that full range of possibilities for cinema.
Emily, what changes for you with these different genre types? As an assistant editor and a post supervisor, it's up to you to kind of organize and get everything kind of put into place to get things ready for Daniel. So what changes for you on your end?
yeah, I think the different needs for setting up a project for documentary and fiction, I think, are largely about because there is no script beforehand. Like for Pipeline, I was taking in like script supervisor paperwork, reports from the camera department and sound department, marking where action starts in the timeline and stuff like that. Whereas with documentary, you don't necessarily get like script paperwork. And so instead of like marking where action might start, it's like marking reaction shots or particularly like emotional moments or random things like exterior shots that could be useful somewhere else. And so, yeah, the needs are just different, I think.
So in going into How to Blow Up a Pipeline, how did you put this all together? I mean, it's an ensemble cast. The script really, involves some very poignant moments in each character's, kind of lifespan to get to that moment of the, I don't want to divulge too much about it, but it really breaks down each character. So how do you start with that type of project?
Well, it was tough to get a handle on all of it. I mean, part of what's so complicated about Pipeline in particular is that it has 8 main members of the ensemble, and it's operating in 2 different timelines because much of the film takes place in a series of flashbacks. And then throughout the course of the heist operation taking place in the present tense, you have different characters in different locations, and to different ways of intercutting between these different timelines and locations. And so even just wrapping my mind around the basics of who is where, when, and why are they there, I think was incredibly difficult. So it took a lot of outlining after the fact just to get a sense of what I was even dealing with in the script. And I remember when I read the script, I thought, there's a really good chance that none of this is going to work because what they were doing was very bold in the script. But I really have to hand it to our writers, Danny, Ariella, and Jordan, because they had really thought through just about all of the ramifications of this way of structuring things. And there were very few things on like a structural level that had to shift over the course of editing.
Yeah, so I'd love, since we kind of talked about some of the other creative collaborators, I would love to understand the relationship between you and the director while editing this film. How involved were they? Were there any moments that you pushed for something within the storytelling that you're like, this has to happen this way, or was this kind of a fluid process?
It was incredibly fluid, and I think this is also a testament to how nice it is to work with your friends. I basically learned how to make movies with Daniel. I mean, he's an incredibly talented person. We went to college together and sort of started making these like, awful no budget music videos together. But it sort of gave us this common language that we could use to describe movies. And we watched so many films together. There were days when we would watch like 5 films together, just like sitting on the couch and slowly fusing to the fabric or something. So it really helps to just come from that common knowledge base. And so I think that there's a lot of shared trust there, especially after having cut a feature together before. And so the process on how to blow up a pipeline was, in that sense, I think, very straightforward and very, very peaceful. I think there are always things that people disagree about. Like there are always moments when I want to do things my way. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing that I've learned over time also is that if you are quick enough in the edit, it's a lot easier to just try things out a lot of the time than it is to continue to argue about why something will or won't work. Because usually, if you can just test something out, put it on the screen and watch it, one person will be convinced to do things a different way. Either the director will say, oh, actually, that's not really going to work. Or I'll say, I was totally wrong. This technique that I thought was going to be a disaster ended up working really well.
And how about, Emily and Daniel, how did you guys work together? As an assistant editor, Emily, were you able to like put together any rough cuts, any edits that you would, maybe like, hey, I want to try it this way. Like, what was your dynamic together in kind of, running through the creative flow?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. This was in like 2021 when I started on this project. And a lot of it was actually remote. So we were like in our apartments in New York, like passing drives back and forth to each other. And just due to the sheer amount of like analog footage there was, my job was mainly like technical. I had to manually sync all the footage. And so that was kind of what I was in my apartment doing the whole time. So I wasn't able to do that on this project, but I think with the project that the doc that we both worked on together recently, there was definitely a lot more like creative collaboration between us.
Now, just to give some context to the audience here, How to Blow Up a Pipeline was actually shot on film. So I have a couple of questions to break down there. One, what was your workflow like, Emily, to make all that kind of happen? Because it's a little different and unusual for an independent film to shoot on film. I love film. I have no argument in there at all. But the workflow kind of changes quite a bit. So that's my first question: is kind of your workflow with working with a film, a shot on film project.
Yeah. This was actually not the first project that I worked on that was shot on film. I actually had the privilege of editing an analog film on like a flatbed Steenbeck in college, and that was super cool. So it was basically like taking those skills and like actually applying them to like the computer. So like everything had to be manually synced. So like the I and O buttons on my laptop like fell off of my computer halfway through, because that's just how you have to sync footage manually. And we use like the multicam workflow in Premiere. So yeah, just there's no time code. That's all.
Yeah. So what was the reason for shooting on film? I was saying like not a lot of independent films are shooting on film. What was the particular reason for that?
Well, aside from the fact that it just looks really good, I mean, there were some technical reasons. And I also have to hand it to our DP, Tahila, who's just a phenomenal DP. And she has a lot of experience working on film, also, despite being, relatively young, like most of the people who worked on the film. So she was a perfect person to work with. Film, I think, was really well suited to that environment, and also to a lot of the references that they were looking at in prep. So they were looking at things like Zabriskie Point and a lot of Michael Mann films, all of these older films that were shot on film, and that I think really benefit from that sort of gritty feel. When you're shooting outside in all these daytime exteriors in the desert, I think a lot of digital cameras can be a little bit unforgiving. And film, I think, gives it this incredible quality that I think even the best grades on digital images can't quite replicate. So I think that was very helpful just in terms of the visual feel of the thing. But additionally, I think that there's also something that happens on set when you're shooting on film, because people know that it's really precious. everybody kind of has to sit up a little bit straighter and focus in and deliver the goods. And when you have a project that's being shot sort of in the middle of nowhere in the desert in New Mexico, and you have a really short day because there's not so much lights and it takes a lot of time to actually get to set, you have to be incredibly efficient. And so I think that film actually just instilled this discipline in everyone on set. And I think that comes through in the results.
Yeah, it's almost that moment you hear the from the camera, like everyone just kind of goes, "Oh, that's money going through the machine right now." So be on your A game. So you're telling me a really interesting way that you're able to get kind of low quality video from the camera and able to actually get that into Frame.io. So I'd love to hear that workflow and how you guys were able to incorporate that into this edit.
Yeah, so I usually really like going to set. Like, I love the energy of being on set. I love being able to give people pretty direct feedback when I'm there and can actually see things with my own eyes. But in this case, it didn't really make sense because we were shooting on film. And so all the film had to be shipped to Photochem in LA from New Mexico. They would process it and upload dailies to us over Frame. And so that led to a delay in our ability to actually give feedback on what was happening on set. And it became necessary for us to find some other way to communicate about what was happening. And so Jordan, who was actually a writer and EP on the film, was responsible for uploading at the end of every day these really low quality dailies that they had taken that were basically from this video tap in the film camera. So it's basically like if you stuck a little camera in the viewfinder, it's exactly what you would see. So it's very low quality, it's a little bit fuzzy, but it was enough for us to get a sense of what was being shot. And in that sense, it was very helpful because even when things were going wrong on set and they were wondering if they were actually getting the material they needed, Emily and I could review that and just give Danny a call and say, "Hey, it looks great. Looks like you're getting all the shots you need."
What about for you, Emily? What kind of changed in that post workflow using this kind of system? And have you done that before in the past with other films that you've worked on that were on film?
I think this was the first time I was using Frame.io heavily for like a feature film. Yeah, so I would get like the automated email from Photochem that the scans came into Frame.io, and that's when I knew it was like time to sync footage. And then yeah, Dan used the video tap dailies for like initial review. And then after I had sunk the actual scans to the production sound, I would upload those as well. So Danny and whoever needed to look, who was on set, could actually see the real dailies that were sunk to the production sound. So it was kind of like a three-way dailies process.
So since we're talking a lot about independent film, I want to throw the question out to the group: is what do you think makes an independent film successful? What makes a good story in your eyes?
It's tough because it's so subjective, and I think that what creates that sort of passion in different people is always so different. And I think for me, one of the reasons that Pipeline was so appealing in particular is that I think it does a good job of combining entertainment value with some serious questions about the world. It's at its heart a very serious film, but it manages to make it very fun as well. And I think that that's kind of the sweet spot that I'm always aiming for in an independent film, something that has grander ambitions on like a political level or an emotional level, but that also knows how to package all of those big ideas into something that is very accessible to a mainstream audience.
What about for you, Emily?
Yeah, independent filmmaking is punk, and I appreciate that, and especially when the punk aspects also are in the narrative of the film. Yeah, it's just something I really appreciate. So it was a lot of fun working on a film that was very punk in narrative, but also in the process.
Yeah. What do you think independent filmmakers can do to make their films look and feel more cinematic or reach that bar of Hollywood that everyone wants to try to achieve?
Well, I guess one thing I would have to say to that is I don't know that everybody should or wants to achieve the standard of Hollywood. And I think one of the things that's so exciting about working in independent film is that there are a lot of people with like very small ambitions. And I think that there should be space for a lot of films that aren't trying to be a big blockbuster or like that want to fit into a genre space. So my hat is off to those people. And yeah, but I think that if you are trying to achieve on the level of, I don't know, if you're trying to make something that feels like a Hollywood film, I think often it has to do with being a scholar of film on some level as well, like really immersing yourself in the kinds of films that you're trying to reference in what you're making, and trying to figure out what they do really well and try to replicate those techniques.
So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about kind of your back end tools. And I know we talked about Frame.io a little bit, but I'd love to get kind of a broad spectrum of your full workflow. From going to Frame.io into Premiere and then back into Frame, how you worked with your creative team to kind of get that collaboration going. And then also, were you using some of these tools before this film or other projects in the past?
Well, I guess I had some earlier experience with Frame. I mean, I'd used it, I think, first with some VFX vendors because it became a really helpful tool for just reviewing individual shots. And I mean, I love being able to mark things up and like draw on the image and say, this corner of this comp looks really weird to me. And that sort of feedback is incredibly helpful. But then I think it was through this project that I really sort of discovered the full range of possibilities. And I mean, as Emily was saying, we sort of used Frame as a file transfer program a lot of the time. We were using it at the beginning as a dailies review platform. And then as the process went along, it became very helpful for me to send exports of individual scenes to Daniel when he was on set. So as I was assembling things while they were shooting, then I could start to put together scenes into larger sequences and just send them over so he could say, oh, it looks like we're actually making a movie here. And then as we actually got to like full cuts, and so much of the team is in LA, even though we were cutting in New York, it was great to be able to send full cuts to people and get reviews from our producers, from other members of the team. Yeah.
Now, Emily, you said this was your first run at using Frame.io. What changed for you? Are you kind of in for Frame as you go forward for other projects, or where are you at with that?
Yeah, we love Frame. I think, yeah, it can be used throughout the entire process, which is like pretty unique. Like from dailies to getting creative feedback, and then to also like turning things over and improving things from like VFX vendors or graphics vendors. So yeah, it kind of you can use it throughout the entire process in very like adaptive ways, which I've always appreciated about it.
Now, did any of you take advantage of any of the advanced features, like say like watermarking or secure sharing, to kind of, spread these out across your different teams or send it out to, studio or client folks?
That wasn't really so much a part of our workflow, since we're very indie and playing a little bit fast and loose.
Totally.
Maybe it would have been wise to use some of those features, but next time.
All good. Now, you edited in Premiere as well. How was that experience? And Emily, it's probably geared for you because you got to make sure everything's kind of in there and organized and ready to go. But are you well versed in Premiere? Are you a regular user of Premiere? And how was it working with this film inside of that application?
Yeah, I used Premiere for kind of a while. I would like make DIY films when I was like a tween, using Premiere on my mom's laptop. So, but especially recently, like with productions, we use productions on Pipeline. And so we set up the project so that each scene was in its own project, kind of organized that way with all the dailies from that scene in there. And then Dan had like a bin for working out of, like a bin for archived cuts, things like that, a bin for like sound effects or music and whatnot. So we were able to like keep everything very, like the project size is very small and everything kind of in its own project or bin. And yeah, that worked pretty well. We also use like multicams for syncing the dailies. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you guys have a central server you worked off of? Where did you kind of keep all your footage?
We had mirrored SSD drives for this project. So I would either like run a drive over to Dan with the new scans, or I would like upload them, and then Dan would pull them back down, just depending on the day. But yeah, we used mirrored SSDs, and then on our documentary that we just worked on, we used a server. So we've used both.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think I've liked most about productions, that it is very adaptable. On Pipeline, I think it was helpful to be able to just edit off of this tiny SSD. I mean, which is only really possible, I think, on a narrative feature because you have a much lower shooting ratio than a doc. But I appreciated being pretty mobile. I remember one time we were doing a test screening out in LA, and I was literally in a car going from our Airbnb to the theater where we were showing it, and I was exporting the cut while while we were in the car, which wouldn't have been possible if we were connected to some massive drive or had to be hooked up to a server. So it was great for that. And in our latest project, having a shared server also gave us all sorts of other features that we couldn't have used with mirrored drives, like using project locking. And yeah, that I think was also so necessary, especially as Emily was getting much more involved in the creative process of cutting things. And it was more likely that we'd be stepping on each other's toes.
So I want to kind of go kind of high level on this question, but we have a lot of people in the room right now kind of listening, but we probably got some aspiring editors or people that are looking to kind of get into this business and start working in post-production. What do you recommend they do? Where should they start? Who should they collaborate with? Like, what's a good way to kind of, get them their foot in the door, should I say?
Emily, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Make films with friends, like make work that you can practice editing with. Like that's what I did when I was, again, like a tween. And also join like filmmaking communities. Like I'm a member of Brown Girls Doc Mafia and Asian American Documentary Network, and also Post New York Alliance. And yeah, I found a lot of like community and work through those spaces. And also like if I have I run into like a technical thing that I don't know what the best practice is, those are avenues I can use to like seek people's advice and expertise. And also I would say don't let gaps in technical knowledge stop you from trying to pursue an opportunity that seems really exciting to you. And just be willing to do your homework and ask a lot of questions and learn on the job.
Yeah. Daniel?
That's great. I mean, I would second all of that advice. I think is very good. I would also say that it's good to just watch a lot of movies. And I really encourage going to film festivals, in part because it gives you a sense of what's getting made, what's out there. It helps you develop your taste, what you actually like seeing in a movie and what you don't. And it's also an opportunity to network more. I mean, lots of people I've met at film festivals have become good friends and people I've collaborated with afterwards. So I'd highly recommend that.
Well, I just want to know, there's actually quite a few questions in the queue, so I do want to get to those here shortly. But before we jump over to that, what's next? What are y'all working on? What are you able to share? But I'll start with you, Daniel.
Yeah. Well, we just finished up this documentary called Sperm World, and that's a feature doc on FX. It'll be airing on March 29th. So tune in, and then it'll be on Hulu right afterwards. But it's basically about the world of unregulated sperm donation. It follows people who meet online and then convene in motel rooms and parking lots and exchange genetic material. So it's a very unusual documentary, but another one that I made with a close friend of mine, Lance Oppenheim, whose first feature I also edited. So I'm very excited for that. And Emily had a big hand in making that happen.
Yeah, Emily. So yeah, please, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, Sperm World is also premiering at True False next week at this point, so we'll both be there, I think. And yeah, that was a fun doc to work on. It was a very interesting world. And I'm now editing my first feature documentary, which has also been exciting. I can't go into that much detail about it, but yeah, it's been a fun time.
That's amazing. So Emily, are you on a pursuit to go into the editing world? To be an editor?
Yeah, it's yeah, I would like to be an editor. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun on this new project as well. So hopefully it'll come to a screen soon.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. And yeah, please let us know when that starts making some headway. So this documentary on FX, obviously it's got a little bit more backing behind it. It's not exactly independent as you said it was the other film. Was it some kind of heaven? Was the other
Yeah,
one
that's right.
that you did with Lance? Yeah, so I guess my question is what changed on this production versus another? I mean, obviously independent film, there's a lot more freedom and things like that, but what changed when you jumped into working on a show for FX or a documentary for FX?
Well, I mean, honestly, it doesn't feel like a whole lot has changed. It feels like maybe we have some more resources to actually see the vision out fully, but it feels quite independent in a lot of ways. I mean, it's not like we're going into a post facility or FX offices or something like that. Lance has his own separate office, and so it feels like we're just kind of in his little world. And FX has also just been a dream to work with too. I mean, they're very supportive of his vision. They were also working with the New York Times. They were the film is sort of loosely inspired by an article that came out in the Times in 2020. So the two of them working together were a pretty great dream team for us.
Amazing. Well, I love it. I'm so happy for both of your successes. It's, what an incredible journey, and you still have so much more to do. So we're really excited to see what's going to happen. And I really appreciate both of you sharing your insight and your stories. But we do have a nice queue up of questions. So if there's any folks in the audience that want to get their questions answered, throw those in, because we've got a few that are kind of stocked up here. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into Q&A. All right. So our first question comes in from David, and David's got a couple questions in here. So we'll kind of just go down the list. So I want to show up on the screen. Amateur question. I'd love to hear how you edit full-length films without the system crashing. If I'm not mistaken, you cut into sections and glue it up at the end, but what are the pro procedures?
I mean, honestly, I think a lot of it just has to do with project setup. I think that a lot of instability issues often come from setting things up in a way that makes the system somewhat unstable. But if you're working from proxies, which is what we've been doing for just about every project, I found that Premiere is very stable. And so we haven't had a lot of issues with crashing throughout the process. Generally, I start by assembling things in individual scenes, then working into larger sequences. But at a certain point, once you're at a rough cut, I tend to just work in the full length of the film, unless there's a specific section that I'm trying to break out and really focus on, doing very fine-tuning kind of work. I really like working in the full length of the film because you get kind of a sense of how something fits into the broader context of things. So I guess what I would say is that is maybe more of a kind of tech question about how you're going about the project setup.
Cool. Emily, anything to add there?
My main thing would just be using proxies. I think I see a lot of projects being cut on the raw media, and that is often the bottleneck of performance or causing crashes. So making offline media, making proxies is what I would recommend. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. David, I know you got a couple other questions in here, but I'm going to pop back into a couple others before we get to your other questions. I'm going to throw this one up there from John. Can you talk about your workflow for assembling a rough cut of a documentary without a script and just with notes from the director producer?
Oh boy, yeah. I mean, it's a slow and difficult process for sure. And I think usually, I mean, I always start by just watching all of the footage that exists. And at least in my work with Lance, I haven't always had all of the footage before starting to work. So I review what's there, and then I take time to review each batch of footage as it comes in. I think that there's been a trend in a lot of films getting made now toward having larger post teams and less time to actually immerse oneself in the footage. But I think that time is actually really essential because things continue to change over the course of the process, and you kind of need to know what all you have. So I start by watching everything. Then there are about 2 weeks where I'm just banging my head against the wall and doubting that I'll ever be able to assemble anything ever. And I question how I was able to do it before. But then at the end of that 2-week period, I usually start putting together some rough assemblies of whatever scenes just appeal to me most. And usually after a series of conversations with the director, producer, whoever else, I get a sense of kind of what's most interesting and what themes and ideas I want to tackle first. So I usually start from that place without actually thinking so much about what the narrative importance of a specific scene is, and then work outwards from there after sort of establishing an idea of what the visual and stylistic identity of the thing is, and start to kind of come up with what the narrative structure will be, basically like putting all of the beads in the string together bit by bit.
Perfect.
But
Thank
a
you.
lot of note cards. Use index cards.
Okay. Thank you, John, for your question. Let me hop over to some other ones here. We've got one from Ronald, which I think is kind of interesting. How do you connect with a more experienced editor who will mentor you? I feel that collaboration is discussed, but elusive at times. And I really regularly get stuck in my solo editing ventures. And Emily, I think this might be a good question for you because you're breaking into that world more and more. So yeah, I want to throw it out to you.
Yeah, editing can be very lonely. Like you're just in a room by yourself and like spending time with a lot of footage. So yeah, it's a very solitary thing. I think if there's an editor that you are thinking of, maybe just like reaching out, a cold email, I think can never hurt. And also joining communities that, like I'm in Brown Girls Doc Mafia and ADOC. And so like communities that have like a pre-existing community structure, I think I would recommend. I'm also around if you want to chat. But yeah.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you, Ronald, so much for your question. All right. Let me grab another one in here. Let's go back up to. Let's go to this one. This is a good question here. How often do you give feedback to a set so they correct material or things that are not properly done? I think that nowadays it's normal that that may happen, which I think is what you were trying to get at, Diego. But yeah.
Well, I mean, I try to give feedback as often as possible. The issue is that, especially on an indie film, the timeline is often so tight that there isn't a lot of room for really correcting things. Like generally, I mean, I guess in Pipeline, we did go back and reshoot one important scene in the film, but there isn't a lot of time to completely like redo things. Usually they've moved on to the next location. You can't really go back. But I think that it's often most useful, well, for a couple of things. One is if there are little pickups that you want to get, like for instance, on Daniel Goldhaber's first feature, Cam, I was on set and I said, you know, I think we could really just use an insert of this doorknob. And that's the kind of shot that they can just pop off in like 5 minutes with very little setup. And it's really helpful in the edit to have that shot. So I often find that it's that sort of little thing that will just make your life easier as an editor that's helpful. And then also I think part of it is just about morale building too. And the director often needs to just hear, good job, you're getting the material you need. Or sometimes it's maybe more process-oriented type of stuff, like you should be confident in what you're getting in these first couple of takes. You don't need to get like 3 more angles in this scene, or you know, basically just trying to give them the confidence to execute their vision as much as possible.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, Diego. You had a second question that was similar to this one. So we're going to answer this one. But if you have any other follow-ups to that, Diego, please throw that in the chat. All right. Here is an interesting one about a little bit about workflow here. It's from Savannah. What does media archiving and long-term storage look like for a large project like a feature? Who stores all that media once that project wraps? It's a good question.
Emily, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I guess it depends. Like, I think for a network film or something like that, the network will retain a copy. And I've used like LTO tapes a bunch for archiving for networks. LTO tapes are kind of like printing the digital media onto this more analog tape, and it lasts longer and it's like generally considered more stable. As for who holds all the media, a lot of that depends, especially on indie films. A lot of the times, like a director or producer or editor will just have the drives like in a closet somewhere, which still counts as archiving. But yeah, I guess it just depends.
Yeah, I mean, I still have drives from my earliest projects sitting around my apartment, so it's a constant
Guilty.
problem.
Guilty as charged. All right, cool. Savannah, thank you so much for that question. If you have any follow-ups, let me know. There was actually a good one here by with Laura. I work with young film students, and it seems like data management workflows for collaboration, etc., are not covered in formal classes. What could instructors add that would better prepare new editors?
I'm honestly kind of two minds about this. I do think that there are a lot of programs and a lot of classes with film students that don't adequately prepare people for the realities of working in film, and there are a lot of workflow techniques that would be really helpful to learn. At the same time, I also feel like the most important things to learn as a filmmaker are much more about the creativity and critical thinking surrounding using a camera and using your editing software. And so I feel like actually when I was learning to edit, I was actually spared a lot of the kind of technical stuff, which I think actually really improved my creative abilities. And a lot of the technical stuff came later as I was learning on the job. I guess I feel like a lot of those sorts of things, if you're pretty proactive like Emily, a lot of those things come pretty naturally to you once you're on the job. And so I'm actually not entirely sure that I would have wanted to have that much more technical instruction at the time. But Emily, do you feel any differently about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The balance of the technical and creative is like part of the editorial process the whole time. I would say like maybe just learning how to set up a project in an organized way would have been nice for like I would name folders like the weirdest things before like I actually figured out how to like be a real assistant editor. And just like having folders like in an order that makes sense, like by date or like day or something. Just basic things like that, I would probably say would be great. But yeah, again, like the creative is always going to be the most like critical thing, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Laura, for that question. Let me clear that one out. There's another question on actual, it seems like bins to projects and media. This might be a good one for you, Emily. Do you find that it's possible to conceive and implement a file management procedure from bins to project to media consistently from early on, or is it normal to have to adapt this constantly?
I would probably like set up the like how you would structure it like from the start and try your best not to change it in mid process. I think it can lead to like issues down the line. And so I think it's worth having like just like one initial conversation. Maybe it takes kind of a long time to figure out, but where you like hash all those things out, write down like what things that you're going to follow, like date, structure, or scene, like organizing by date or scene or however it applies to your project, and then like sticking to that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Lucas, for your question. I'm just going to take a few more here because we're getting close on time, and I want to find some interesting one here. We talked about that a little bit. This is actually a good one. I like this one a lot. Is there a particular movie or show that inspired your careers? You know, like we all love watching films as we kind of break into this, industry that we're in. But what's inspired you guys?
Honestly, I think the first movie that I watched that made me think, wow, I should really do this with my life was The Matrix. And then I think the second one was Vertigo. Two very different films, but great ones that really made me interested in it. But I think also just getting exposed to smaller indie films as my film education progressed was really helpful just in terms of creating a sense of possibility, like the sense that you could go out and do this yourself. You don't need to wait until the studio system agrees to make whatever you want to make.
Emily?
Yeah, I used to love watching like Planet Earth documentaries. And like I didn't really understand why I was so into them, but I think like the concept that like a whole narrative can happen without necessarily somebody like saying dialogue. I mean, David Attenborough, obviously, but like animals can tell stories without like necessarily like speaking. And so there's like this whole other thing that is unlocked with like cinema that you can only access with like motion pictures and stuff. So I always cite those kinds of nature docs as like my entrance into the world.
Love it. All right. Well, thank you for your question. This would be a good one for both of y'all, but I'm working on a documentary now. Any advice for a first timer?
Buckle up. I don't know. It's a very long and arduous process, and I think yeah, the uncertainty of making a doc, I think, is one of the hardest things for anyone, but especially a first timer. I think a lot of it is much more about the psychological toll that just working on something for potentially years can take on you, and not knowing exactly what the path is. But I think over time I've gotten a lot better at just sitting with the uncertainty and accepting that there's so much that's unknown about the path. And that I think is all part, subconsciously at least, that's all part of the process of actually getting to a finished film. It really has to be discovered and isn't something that you can just decide from the beginning. Like the pitch deck is not going to be the finished film. There's something that you're going to find through the process. And that's kind of part of the challenge and the beauty of working in doc for me.
Emily, anything to add there?
Yeah, definitely like acceptance of the unknown, and that like the script is not written, and that it will constantly be written and rewritten throughout the process. Yeah, and also just having like open communication with the director of the film if there is one, or yeah, just having people to chat with is always nice, because yeah, editing a film is very lonely. So
yeah, and I guess also to that point, I think it's great to have people you really trust to give feedback on things in their infancy. People who will see the potential in the footage and not just what they currently see in front of them. Because I think it's very easy if you're making a feature doc to just get a little bit lost in your own head, and if you don't have a group of people you can rely on to give you objective feedback, it can be very isolating, and then you can wind up with something where you're relying on like systems of meaning that are totally obscure to everybody else.
Perfect. We're getting close on time, so I'm trying to keep an eye on it. And our audience has a ton of questions, so I'm trying to kind of dig through them. But I'm going to close on this last one here, and I'm sorry for anyone that we didn't get questions on. But I'm going to make sure that I'll get Daniel and Emily to share how you may be able to reach out to them after the show. But this one I think is actually a good one, because I think all of us kind of go through this. But when editing some projects, I found that the client is giving endless rounds of feedback, so the project just seems never ending. How would you steer the client to make their final decisions? Is there a way to even do that?
I don't know. That's tough. I mean, I guess often in at least the space that we work, there are schedule and budget constraints that make it impossible to just endlessly edit things. And so usually, you run out of time or you run out of money. The two are usually related, and you kind of just have to arrive at what the film is. But I think that another part of it is, I guess I had a teacher who used to tell me that a film is finished when subsequent changes make the film worse. And so a big part of it, I think, is just making sure that working on your bedside manner, so that you can basically talk to the client and say like, hey, I actually think we kind of had it the last time, and being good at articulating in terms that mean something to the client, why these new changes are actually getting them farther from their initial vision. So if they can be made to kind of realize that actually like tinkering isn't going to make it perfect, it's not going to address all of their anxieties, but you can be confident in what you've done because you've tried a lot of things. I think that often helps.
I always use the like if you're doing your hair in the morning kind of example where you just keep messing with it and it's like it's already looks good, but you always have those little tinkering and you're never going to get it to that point. So it's like just call it a day and move on with it. So I always use that as a metaphor. But anyway, thank you, David, for that question. Hopefully that helped you kind of answer that never-ending thing that we always kind of deal with as editors, getting endless feedback. So thank you again for that question. And unfortunately, folks, we are close to the end of our time. We're actually at the end of our time, but I want to thank our guests, Daniel and Emily, for joining us today. I appreciate you so much for giving us all of your insight and your stories and your endless amount of knowledge that you have. Thank you both for joining us so much.
Thank you, Shawn. And thank you to everybody who tuned in too. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you as well, Emily. We appreciate you both coming on.
Thank you.
So I also want to thank all of you that joined us today. So whether you're just starting out or you're already experienced in post-production, there's always room to grow and understand process from many different angles and perspectives. So if you want to learn more about Frame.io and learn more about how to use Frame, definitely head to our Frame.io live page, frame.io/live, and sign up for our ongoing sessions. We've got weekly training sessions where we can show you how to use Frame. We also have more Frame.io live events coming up very soon. So check back often as we update our schedule regularly. Also, follow us on Instagram. We post a lot of industry information there and also new product updates that we have. So definitely check us out on Frame_IO. But thank you again for joining us on Frame.io Live. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.